Welcome to the Innovation Ecosystem Podcast. We interview remarkable and thought-provoking guests about innovation, leadership, and change in the world of business. Whether you're an executive or an entrepreneur, our objective is to help you and your organisation create an entrepreneurial culture, become more innovative, and better able to respond to change. Each week, we'll deconstruct world-class performance from the arenas of business, academia, science, and sports. Each week, you can expect key insights, fresh perspectives, and proven tools you can use straight away to make you more successful professionally and personally. With your host, Marc Bidwell.
Hello, this is Marc Bidwell, and welcome back to the Innovation Ecosystem Podcast. My guest today is Marc Vollenweider, who is founder and CEO of a company called Evalueserve. And a number of you might remember we had him on an earlier show in the first season, and his conversations, his insights, the discussions about his business and the kind of transformations his business is creating in the marketplace attracted a huge amount of interest in our audience. And so we've got him back on the show again, this time to talk a little bit more about how he founded the business, to talk also about his new book, Mind+Machine, and also to go into some of the characteristics of the industries that he is going into and disrupting, and to describe quite how he does this, leveraging the power of technology and also a world-class employee base. So in this episode, you're going to hear specifically about his transition from being a McKinsey partner to founding a business that employs over 3,500 people. He talks a little bit, in detail about the winner-takes-all characteristics of the markets that he plays in and his strategies to go after these markets, which are detailed in his new book, as I mentioned, Mind+Machine. And thirdly, some of the counterintuitive benefits that arise from simplification and automation. And simplification is a big theme that we come across again and again as to how do you actually create the conditions for innovation. And you start by creating space. And a great way of doing that is simplifying. And essentially, much of what Marc and his team do is helping organizations simplify some of their core processes using technology, using Mind+Machine strategies, which enables them to then go on and to innovate and to develop new capabilities to develop their markets. So lots in here. Hopefully you'll find it as enjoyable as I did. And just a reminder for those of you who are interested in learning more about the innovation ecosystem, join thousands of other business leaders who are accessing strategies, tools and technologies that help them innovate and make themselves and their organizations more innovative, more entrepreneurial. So go online to our website, www.innovationecosystem.com. Welcome back to Marc Vollenweider, CEO of Evalueserve.
This is Marc Bidwell. Welcome back to the Innovation Ecosystem. With me today is Marc Vollenweider, who is the founder of Evalueserve. And Marc, you were on an earlier show several months ago, which got extremely good ratings. So welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much, Marc, for having me today.
So, when we last came together, we talked about your book, and we're going to get that's just will have been released by the time the show goes out. But before we get there, there's a few things that some of our listeners, were interested in finding out more about from our earlier conversation. So, what I'd love to do is, a couple of things. Firstly, you were a partner at McKinsey, running their offshoring operation, I think originally in India, and then you'd made the transition to set up Evalueserve. That's the right biography or the right timing, right?
That's correct. I was a consulting partner in India, and then also ran the McKinsey back office center, the so-called knowledge center in Delhi, as a side responsibility, and then fell in love with this idea, and then sort of left McKinsey and started Evalueserve from scratch as a greenfield venture.
So that's the bit that I wanted to start on, because McKinsey, fantastic organization, strong, great place to work, enormous learnings, and that model worked well and is proven, as was the back office. But as you stepped out into the big wide world of doing this on your own, I'm really interested in what are the this journey from executive to entrepreneur, and what were your key learnings as you went out to set up this business?
Yes, I always wanted to become an entrepreneur, right? So leaving McKinsey at the partnership level is, of course, pretty tough because you are on a cushy salary. It's very interesting work, and it's, of course, global in nature. So there you go from a complete, from a high sort of global brand to no brand startup, no office, no employees, no clients, and only your own money to invest in. And that was, of course, a tough experience.
And I think you had dependents as well. I think you've got quite a large family as well, haven't you, Mark?
That's correct. At the time, we had already 3 children of ages 6, 5, and 3. And one was in the pipeline, so it was not totally without risk. But I think one of the biggest learnings in this was that my wife supported me all along, and this was probably one of the major sort of success factors in all of this. So you can very well say that this was one of the key points.
Yeah, wonderful. So, and as you got into it, I mean, I think one of the things about the story was how quickly you were able to scale the business, but also I think, you made some decisions earlier on around not taking on business until you had the processes in place, and then you were able to scale really quickly. So, which is very rare because it's not just a software business. You use software a lot, but can you just explain what was your thinking? Because it sounds like a very systematic, very analytical approach to building a business, which might have created some tension given the emotional challenges, or the stress associated with setting up your own business as well. How did you manage that?
Yes, in hindsight, it probably looks a little more professional than it was at the time. So when we got into this, we thought that the world would come and ask for our services, which was unfortunately and totally surprisingly not the case. Which is also one of the major learnings. I think even at McKinsey, you don't know everything, so that's really good. We left when we left McKinsey, we started out on the premise of what is called geographic cost arbitrage. Right? You hire young, eager, and very smart people in India, and they will do very smart work for Western companies. And of course, there's a lot of cost differential. So we did that, but then we learned very quickly that there was a so-called double chasm. The clients, it was like the model was completely new. So the clients weren't quite sure of our abilities. So they would say, what, you want me to outsource my strategic research work? That was chasm number 1. And then chasm number 2, it was, oh, you want to do that from India with these dial-up modems that at the time still made that strange noise when you connected. So we had to educate the market a lot. And initially, we would have almost gotten bust. So we only became profitable after 14 months. And before that, had several moments where our cumulative cash flow curve or the money in the bank was down to $50,000, down from our 1 million of invested own capital at the beginning. So it was close. Mm-hmm. However, we honed in on the key processes that worked. One was market research and business research, and the other one was intellectual property services, so patent searches. So we started with these two, and then got going and really sort of made sure that we had the processes in place. Got our first success stories, very small projects initially, but got recommendations, and then it grew very rapidly because we had already established the backbone, which could then be scaled rather quickly. And I think this is one of the main learnings that in order to scale, one needs the processes and the backbone in place to really do that. Otherwise, you just multiply chaos, which is not necessarily conducive to good quality at the client's end. So that led to a very fast growth curve of sometimes 100% per year. But we had started from zero. So initially, these growth rates were, of course, rather easy to create. Later on, it became harder, but then we expanded into new types of services. So, for example, the whole financial services industry opened up to us with equities research, with investment banking, with index processing. And then on the other side, we had procurement-related services like procurement intelligence, strategic intelligence, and increasingly a lot of data analytics. Mm-hmm. So the growth happened, one, because of geographic expansion and new clients, but secondly, also because we had new service lines that we added, but all of them had kind of a similar backbone, similar process in place. So that's how we grew.
And last time, Mark, we talked about a lovely example of how you helped to automate the pitch book development for some of the investment banks, and it struck me, one of the big themes on the Innovation Ecosystem podcast is that people, in order to innovate, you've got to create space. You've got to actually simplify and get stuff out of the way so that you can actually begin to, get into some of the bigger opportunities or explore some of the bigger opportunities in front of you. And I'm really curious. I mean, so the example that you gave the other day a few months ago now, of creating taking the pitch book development process off the plates of a lot of these investment banks. I mean, can you just give us an example of what were the banks able to do as a result of you taking that on and simplifying and standardizing? I mean, because obviously it enabled them to generate or leverage new capabilities, essentially. Can you give some examples of what they were able to do as a result of that space being created by you?
Yes. So the banks had one fundamental problem, that all the work was still manual. So it was slow, it was error prone, and it was complex when you look at how the managing director of the bank would interface with his or her associates, who would then work together to create the pitch book that ultimately would lead to the client meeting. Of course, that would always also happen on Sundays, Saturdays, and Sundays, because that's normal working hours for the bankers. But all of that, bringing everything together, was very complex. Mm-hmm. What we did was we tried to simplify the workflow, and that led to a series of effects. First, much higher productivity. So the bankers, supported also by our teams, of course, could get the job done in fewer hours of work. That's point number one. Number two, we were also able to speed up the process. If you look at our latest version, which we didn't have at the time when we spoke last time, now it's a proper platform called Cogito. So Cogito is now a complete workflow system that doesn't just provide an interface to do the research, but it also organizes the whole workflow of a pitch book from A to Z. And it then also provides the knowledge management. So the whole process of putting everything together becomes much easier. The MD can allocate work to the various associates, work packages come together again, reviews can happen, and everything therefore becomes much more efficient. A second point, which I think is also important, is that we have now created centralized assets which are client independent. So say we have an asset now of 40,000 clean logos that is always clean, always up to date with the latest changes in corporate identity and so on. And that leads to a much lower number of changes or corrections that need to be made in the final pack. So everything becomes faster. Also, things like APIs, or these are standard interfaces to databases that go and fetch the data and pre-populate the documents already. All of that leads to more speed, and then interestingly also higher quality. On top of it, it creates also new capabilities that the clients didn't have before. So for example, one surprising thing that happened was at the time when a few bankers, there were some fatal cases of being overworked in London. Mm-hmm. So
literally fatal.
Yeah. People died, yes, mm-hmm. because they were overworked. So, but that led to a shockwave in the whole industry. So Saturdays are now off work. And in order to police that, the client started using our workflow systems as a compliance tool, which was a totally surprising and unexpected side effect of things. So I think there were business benefits as such, because things were faster, they were faster to the client, the quality was better. But on the other hand, there were also side benefits in terms of overall management and better analytics of how the process works. And I would say the learning from that is that it's probably a little bit like what happened with the iPhone. It's very hard to simplify, but once you do it, you address a completely new market and you create opportunities that you didn't know of before. I would call this the option value of simplicity, which is very often counterintuitive and even for us, very surprising.
So I mean, this is fascinating because I mean, one of the things, I haven't created pitch books, but I know I've worked with people creating them, and I know it's pretty painful work. And so you're liberating them from the pain of the work and also the time associated with it. But there is this option value of the simplicity, which means, I guess, that people are able to do something else with their time and come up with new ideas to to progress the business of the bank. I mean, any specific examples of how that's worked in your client base?
I give you another example of our platform, Insight B. Insight B is essentially a pay-as-you-go, on-demand research platform in the cloud. We've essentially packetized the size of a McKinsey knowledge center into a mobile phone, and you as the client can order research in a few seconds via an ordering interface that looks a bit like Amazon. And you can get customized research that specifically answers your question and your request, and this in a pay-as-you-go fashion. Now, we started out with a general market intelligence version of it, but now we can add many more, and one of the hottest one right now is the procurement intelligence version. Now, what does it do? Indirect procurement managers need a lot of research for analyzing their suppliers and their risk profiles. So by using partly artificial intelligence and APIs and big data tools, we can compress and find and compress the data already very early on, and then the human would come and synthesize the findings into insights and then push it out via a cloud-based interface to the clients. So for the clients, this means much lower infrastructure costs because they don't need to keep this all in-house. The knowledge management happens automatically, so they find stuff much more quickly. And then the alerting function is something completely new in research. So people are getting alerted to changes or flags, for example, when a supplier gets sued and there's a major issue, for example. I mean, it would always be the size of a Volkswagen topic, but it would be smaller issues like storms in Thailand damaging the supply chain of hard disk production, for example. So these are things that lead to capabilities at the client's end, which they didn't have before. So they can inform their supply chain much earlier that something's happened in their supply chain, and therefore the risk of being out of stock for the sales force is much reduced. So there are new ways of doing things that at the same time lower the cost, but also increase the service levels. And I think that is the learning we had. It doesn't mean that increasing service level means more money to be paid. Actually, to the contrary, the simpler things are and the more targeted these analytic use cases become, the higher the utility and the lower the cost. So it's again, this is a counterintuitive finding.
Interesting. So, and I mean, this is such a big theme, this idea of simplification, because it does seem like, organizations have become, partly because of technology, have become overwhelmingly complex. And, what you're doing essentially is bringing technology, which is part of the problem, actually bringing it back into making it part of the solution and creating this space for people to think differently about their business and also, as you say, create this optionality. The last time we talked as well, Mark, you talked about the enormous amount of regulatory challenges hitting the financial services market, and we talked a little bit about disruption and how I think you said there was one client that had more regulatory changes they needed to implement than they had employees. And then we got into the conversation about disruption in the banking industry and everyone running off to fintech startups. You work in multiple verticals across many industries. Where else are these sort of seismic changes going on from a point of view of disruption or point of view of market changes? Which other industries are you seeing? I mean, professional services, for instance. I mean, where are you seeing the big changes, but also the big opportunities? I mean, this is really addressed to people either who are in those industries or who are thinking of getting into those industries, who are listening at the moment. Yes.
I think there are a series of areas, and my list is certainly not complete, but I give you a few examples. Let's pick professional services to start with. I think the consulting industry is undergoing quite a bit of change. And I would like, as an example, I would like to give the topic of data analytics. Many of the consulting firms, the very big strategy firms, but also niche players that, for example, work in the risk space, they have been doing engagement-based consulting for a long while. So you have like a 3-month project solving a particular topic in risk, say an IFRS 9 implementation. But then their cost structures are such that they can't support the organizations on an ongoing basis going forward. And I think that is changing now. So many of the clients not only want the consulting, they also want support during the implementation. And not only that, they want continued support on a delivery basis, essentially forever. So what we are seeing happening is that many of the big consulting firms and these niche players are looking for delivery partners. So that's, for example, one area where we see a lot of traction. So we serve these consulting firms as a delivery partner. We put in technology, we build these use cases, we knowledge manage these use cases, and we can then deliver the ongoing service at a much lower cost. So this is not in any way competitive. This is completely symbiotic. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the interesting part. So I wouldn't call it necessarily disruption of the industry, but it's new trends that open new possibilities because the client world is changing dramatically.
And is that, I mean, if you look at the revenue streams, that the client is spending or the cash out for that kind of work, I guess in the old days it was very lumpy. You'd have your guys, McKinsey, in for a period of time, and then they go back to steady state. Whereas, am I right in thinking this is more of a software as a service sort of cost basis?
Yes, so we should also look at the commercial models that are changing. Initially, one started out with the so-called FTE model on our end. So you hire a team, say a team of 5 people on a permanent basis for a certain period of time. Now, this is changing. We see new models emerging. One is pay as you go. So for example, in our Insight B platform, the clients pay by consumption. So if they ask for additional research, they pay for it as you go on a fully variable basis, which of course increases their flexibility a lot. Then on the other hand, you also have what we call pay per unit. So say you pay for a report, you pay a fixed price. And that I think has several advantages for the clients. I mean, it's of course more flexible, but on the other hand, it also incentivizes the supplier to reduce the per unit cost of whatever product, and therefore they become more efficient at it, and therefore they lower the price. So by going into these kinds of models, I think it's a win-win for both parties. But of course, and that's clear, it will be a winner-takes-it-all situation for several products, because once you cracked the machine learning on a certain analytic use case for a certain product, once you cracked the neural network problem, and once you have all the APIs, it becomes a winner-takes-it-all situation, because then you sit on a lot of intellectual property, and that then helps you protect your particular use case. But as there are millions and millions of use cases, it's not that bad. So there are lots of opportunities for players to come up with these kinds of models. I
mean, that's very interesting. I mean, the winner takes all, the platform play where, the barriers to entry or the moat that you've built around your business just gets bigger and bigger and more unassailable, I guess, from the competition. So, I mean, are you, I mean, if you look at the future of your businesses, I mean, where do you see the biggest opportunities? I mean, where are the winner-takes-all kind of spaces that you're going after?
Yes. So without giving away the strategy of Evalueserve too much, I mean, it's to a certain extent described in the book. Yeah. But basically the point is that we believe that there are 1 billion analytic use cases out there. So by segmenting these into the ones that have a return on investment and the ones that don't, we, of course, focus on the ones that have return on investment. And we see a few mega trends affecting them. So, for example, cloud and mobile is certainly going to stay for good. This is not a hype. This is reality. And we see that whichever use cases we'll deliver them in the future over cloud and mobile. So everything is automatically cloud and mobile enabled, which means that we'll have lots of synergies in various places, say on the marketing side, sales side, delivery, knowledge management, customer acquisition. So we can address completely new segments of clients, for example, smaller clients or subsidiaries of companies that are in geographies we just simply could not access with our sales force. So that leads to market expansion. Now, so that's a mega trend. Then, second, there is, of course, there are all these hardcore data analytics use cases around the current data sets, but also new data sets. So when you look at, for example, IoT, Internet of Things, or Industry 4.0, I mean, of course, it sounds, these are, of course, slogans by the marketing departments of the big players, but it's reality. There are lots of data sources that need to be analyzed. Lots of use cases need to be knowledge managed, and nobody has cracked that yet. We believe we have a platform for managing and knowledge management of analytic use cases, so that's for us a very big push. Then we have, of course, the topics that we've talked about before. So in financial services, there are a variety of areas like risk, like banking support, like cross-selling analytics. So there's a series of use cases over there. Then on the innovation side, more on the patent/technology side, there is a lot of technology monitoring, innovation scouting going on, and we capture that. Then there is, of course, the whole space of monitoring. So I give you a very specific monitoring and flagging and alerting, I would say. I give you a specific example. For Chinese luxury markets, we analyze Chinese language that is being used in e-commerce websites or social media or other types of sources, collect this information, draw conclusions from it, and then package it so that, say, the equities research analyst for LVMH in Paris would then have a view on the Chinese luxury goods market, even though he or she doesn't speak doesn't speak Chinese, and gets it delivered to them on a more or less live basis. So these are new opportunities. Then, of course, the whole procurement intelligence space for us is a very important one. I think currently our procurement intelligence version on Insight B is cracking major clients almost every week. So that's almost disruptive. And so, as you can see, our future lies in very targeted point solution for relatively big problems or big analytic use cases, and then we can scale up. I think this will be supported, of course, with a slightly less specific group of research analysts who are going to support slightly less structured use cases. So I think the mix between these point solutions based on workflows and AI and so on, plus then human talent sitting on top, and this on a global scale. That's really what we are looking for.
And you touched on the book, because I mean the book that you've written, Mind+Machine, which will be out by the time this show's out. I mean, what was behind writing the book? Because you alluded to one of the big challenges is that if you're moving so quickly and it's it's a winner takes all market that you're going after, then one wouldn't want to put too many secrets out there. So what was behind writing the book, and how have you managed that? Because it's also a complicated subject, but you've been focusing on trying to make it more accessible to executives and middle managers who don't have the same technical knowledge base that you've got. So how have you handled those two things, Mark?
Indeed. So I was approached by Wiley, the big publisher in the US, a year ago, and they were looking for somebody to write the book about Mind+Machine. Now, as it happens, Mind+Machine is our company strategy, and their research department found us. So they felt there was a need for a book in this space that would simplify or demystify the world of analytics to somebody who either needs to make decisions on analytics or needs to benefit from analytics or is maybe part of creating analytics. So I then started this book, started writing this book in March of this year, 2016. And it became clear very quickly that I needed to simplify a relatively complex topic. I think the key point there is that currently there is so much noise out there regarding big data, artificial intelligence, and basically everybody is saying, "Oh, IBM Watson is going to run away with all the work, and the humans won't have any work left." And I think what we see in our daily work is that this is not the case. In fact, we see it's still very much the mind, the trained mind, who is able to come up with so what's and insights, and supported by the machine, which is very important, but the support of the machine happens more at the data level, at the simple data layer. And already a little bit more complex topic at, say, the information layer or the insight level, there the machines fail rather miserably, at this stage at least. I'm not sure how that's going to look like in 20 years from now, but I felt it was important to let people know who are not specialists in the field that they are not wimps just because they're not using AI every morning. So sorry for the language, but I think it is important to understand that that many people, many managers feel overwhelmed by this marketing language. And one of the findings from the book is that only 5% of all analytic use cases are actually about big data. Everything else is small data. And that's why I coined the term or the sentence, small data is beautiful too, which usually gets me a chuckle when people hear this. Also in artificial intelligence, we tested 25 artificial intelligence engines, and only one of them, which was Squirrel of Switzerland, was good enough to help us improve our process. So I think I'm slightly more skeptical on how quickly artificial intelligence is going to change the world at the insight level. Of course, at the data level, like Google has shown, it works very well. So overall, I think what I tried to achieve with the book is to write almost a guide for the generalist business manager who needs to understand this vast environment of analytics, mind and machine, needs to make decisions, but in a language that is not driven by statistical terms or everything focusing on big data. It's more around how do you manage analytics in your company, how do you create ROI from it, and how do you manage the complexity of all these analytic use cases by managing portfolios of analytic use cases. And I give a methodology on how to do that.
Yeah. And what's resonated? I mean, you've had copies out. I mean, you sent me a copy kindly in advance. I mean, presumably some of your clients have seen it as well. I mean, what resonates most with people who are kind of fresh to the subject, if you like?
Yes. I think first, they love that not everything is big data and AI. They love that. The second one is they also see the organizational aspects of the whole topic. In fact, there is a chapter in the book that people really seem to like, which talks about the psychology of analytics, because everybody thinks that analytics is very rational. But in fact, when you look at what's happening in organizations, it's everything but rational.
Yeah, it's about power as usual, I guess.
Exactly, and they're the nerds and the anti-nerds who can talk to each other, and the return on investment of analytic use cases doesn't work out, and workflow systems are not in place, so the user interfaces are bad, so therefore the end user, who actually needs to make a decision based on some information coming from analytics, doesn't have the right information at the right time, in the right place, in the right formats. So I think this was the first sort of feedback that I got, that people said, oh yeah, I can see that every day in my company. The second feedback was, I think they appreciate the analysis of the trends that affect the whole area, and that they are very good news for them. So, for example, cloud and mobile or Internet of Things or user interface design or workflows. On the other hand, I think highlighting some of the risks like data confidentiality, as just experienced again by the IoT attack, denial of service attack that happened 2 weeks ago when Netflix went down. I mean, there are risks, and people, I believe, are not aware of the very significant risks they're getting into. So I think raising the awareness of what's going out there and what are the risks is important, especially for the non-specialists.
Yeah.
You know, a banker, for example, whose junior ED or engagement director is dealing with a neural network for algorithmic trading. If you don't understand what this neural network does, and there is of course no audit trail for most of this, then you simply don't know what happened when the trading results went sour and you lost $10 million on the account, on the trading desk. So I think raising the level of awareness is important. It's appreciated. The third thing that people came back with was saying, well, the third part of the book, which is essentially describes the methodology, is a very prescriptive, rule-based approach where people can use it as a reference guide to tell their people, well, have you checked for user interface design? Have you checked for these risks? Have you done this? Have you done that? So it's basically a very useful, almost textbook approach for how to do it and not to miss out on too many things.
Yeah, and it's actually, I mean, it's relevant irrespective. I mean, it's what's the expression? I mean, it doesn't require you to be working on a big data or a small data project either. Actually, I mean, it's kind of you can use it in any kind of intervention in an organization to change things, right? I mean, that's what I find quite compelling about the methodology.
Correct. Yes, it's independent of what kind of data you're talking about, what kind of, whether it's big or small, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, whether it's workflow based or not, it doesn't matter. I mean, the methodology is kind of all embracing and focuses on the individual analytic use cases and its ROI. So it's ultimately always comes down to ROI and how it produces it, either by increasing productivity, by shortening throughput times or improving time to market, by improving quality, or by giving new capabilities. So all analytic use cases are measured along this, and with 39 examples in it, it kind of gives a good overview of what kind of analytic use cases there are out there.
Yeah, yeah. One of the challenges with putting this down in the traditional book format is obviously, by the time you've written it, it might be out of date. I mean, it's a very rich book, and as you say, very broad range of case studies. But I mean, how quickly, when do you feel? I mean, it's moving. The area is moving so quickly that I presume that this will be that there'll be some new revisions coming out pretty soon as the frontier evolves more aggressively, right?
Well, it depends. You can think of it, it's almost a little bit like math. How has math changed during the last 100 years? For the normal user, math is still the same. I'm not talking about the super specialist user who knows about Riemann spheres and things like that. So I try to write the book in a way that it looks at the logic of everything rather than looking at the leading edge analytic use case that is out there, but is probably not relevant for 99.99% of the world population. So in that sense, the problems described in there are generic in nature. The trends that are in there, like cloud and mobile, Internet of Things, all of that, I think they're going to be around for quite some time to come. And the methodology described is independent of any latest fad or fashion in the analytic, say in predictive analytics, because you can exchange one tool for the other and the same logic still holds. So I would say it's probably going to survive. However, what we already see is that we might need to write additions for specific industries, because we've already heard for example, from financial services or from pharmaceuticals or from industry, that they would like to have specific chapters on each of their industries and see what's going on in there. Yeah. While right now, everybody's happy with getting the overview across all industries.
And I think it would be also interesting to see a lot of your clients, you come from large clients, Global 1000 companies who you work with. But I mean, as you mentioned earlier on, Insight B is targeting smaller, SMEs and startups and far larger client base. It'd be really interesting to see what companies have been able to do with those technologies to really accelerate their growth as well. Correct. I mean, in the book, I also allude to the democratization of analytics, which basically cloud and mobile brings along. By having cloud and mobile, there is a level playing field for small and big companies. And in many cases, I would argue that small companies have a big advantage because they're smaller, more nimble, and more flexible. And by leveraging these technologies, they have the same access to the end clients as very big companies. And I think this is a big opportunity for the smaller companies to play in this game. Yeah. And actually, as I think we mentioned on the last show, the company that I'm involved in, a genomic software company, we use the technology and it saved us a huge amount of time, but it also enabled us to do slightly different things with that data. So, coming back to the whole innovation drive and the ability to simplify, to create the space to innovate. There's quite, irrespective of whether the listener's sitting in a large organization dealing with, some big questions around how to, generate, how to manage the data pools that they've got. Even smaller organizations can benefit from this capability that you're making available across these different platforms. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think this is really good news for everybody because it gives them the flexibility to be able to come up with new products, new solutions very quickly. And if anything, the big players need to be, let's not call it afraid, but at least aware of the smart and young companies around them and maybe create ecosystems around themselves like GE is trying to do, for example. So the big companies, the smart big companies are probably going to try and create standards and ecosystems around themselves so that innovation can bubble up, but still be sort of in their sphere of influence by having control of the standards. Yeah, that's one of the big themes. I think we've talked about it before. The concept of the innovation ecosystem is ultimately that very few companies have access to all the resources. In fact, none of them have access to all the resources they'll need to move forward. So being able to connect and collaborate up and down the value chain in a pre-competitive environment, as well as, head to head with your competition. These are all characteristics, I think, or emerging characteristics that companies need to get good at. So it's almost like the 21st century version of matrix management is ecosystem management. Absolutely. And just the existence of your channel, your company that, is conducting all these interviews and is trying to bring innovators together is a form of an innovation ecosystem. And I think the more we can have these, the better. Procter & Gamble is trying to create that through their Connect organization and does, I think, a very good job of that. And other companies will certainly try to do that as well. Yeah, absolutely. Well, much of what we're doing is in direct response to people in the marketplace saying this is the need, can you help us? But so Mark, just beginning to wrap this up, my final question before I come to the three questions I sent out in advance. To what extent we touched a little bit about your life earlier on in terms of your family life. To what extent do you actually sort of simplify and automate your personal work and your personal work life? I'm interested in how do you bring your mind and machine together in the Vollenweider household, for instance. Good. I would like to bring two examples here. The first one is I have been working from home for the last 16 years with 4 children, and especially during puberty, this is quite valuable because especially during puberty, you're there when the children come home from school. And this would not have been possible without the use of machines. So having video conferencing, we started using Skype in 2003. Very early on, we were one of the first users, and since then have, of course, grown with it. That was one of the major points of using machines in the household, at least for the combination of lifestyle and work. Mm-hmm. The second one, I'm learning from my son. He played one of these computer games, distributed computer games, internet games, where
you build villages, and the villages then stock up resources and then start attacking each other, and you basically try to win as much land as you possibly can. Now, of course, you wonder whether this might be the right type of game. But anyway, given nevertheless that they're playing the game, they were not fast enough in coming up the ranks, the global rankings, quickly enough. So my sons sort of figured out that he was largely playing people who had lots of time. So either people who didn't go to school anymore or who were jobless. So he said he can't do that. I have to go to school, I have to work, I have to sleep, I have to eat. So he started building bots that could play the game. Yep. And then he started building collaborating bots that could play the game together with his friends. So they shot up the rankings and then really were in number one position, and they figured all of that out while, of course, going to school. So the only thing they had to do was to give strategy instructions in the mornings. So I think the learning from that is that you can achieve a lot by leveraging machines, even at home, and that frees up time to do more value-adding things together with your family or your friends. And of course, I'm trying to copy my son's skills now, but he's of course far more advanced than I could ever be.
Well, I mean that's a great description of what a CEO does, right? Give strategy instructions at the beginning of the day. I mean, it's a very nice analogy.
Yeah, and the other thing is, I think I invited my son to come to strategy sessions of Evalueserve for the Insight B product, because I soon realized after about 20 minutes into these meetings that he was having user interface discussions with the programmers that I couldn't follow anymore. And I think he did a lot to teach us how the modern world looks like. So including your youngsters in strategy discussions in your business is actually something that adds quite a bit of value.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, as it happens, I'm interviewing people to help me on my business at the moment, and so far most of them seem to be at least half my age, which is quite sobering. But anyway, that's a new world, right?
Yes.
And as you say, they bring completely different perspectives, which are vital for what we're trying to do. So Mark, just begin to wrap this up. 3 questions. What have you changed your mind about recently?
Yes, I've realized that I used to go to lots of meetings thinking that my value was actually in being in these meetings. And that got me to travel 300,000 air miles a year and exhausted me quite a bit. I think what I've realized and changed now is that maybe my value is more in the looking after innovation, looking after a few key clients, and then writing the book for Evalueserve. So that's really what I've changed. And I think everybody's happy. Our management team are happy because they don't have anybody messing around with their business units anymore. Second, they see a lot more traction coming in on the innovation side. So I hope that's good for everyone.
I mean, it's a really nice example, because I use the language, as a leader, do you create space or do you take up space? And many people as leaders think that they need to run around and be in all the meetings, but in actual fact, all they're doing is taking up space, versus the new model, which is emerging, which you articulated beautifully there, which is actually about creating space for people who you've hired to get on and do the stuff, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Second question, what do you do to remain creative and innovative?
I tend to be most creative when I'm doing something that has nothing to do with work. So I have a couple of ideas for new books. I have also an idea for some interesting venture that I would like to start at some point. So I think the idea is really that while jogging, while running, while hiking in the mountains or skiing in the mountains, I have my best ideas, and I think I'm going to continue that. It's a bit of a structured way of thinking, but sometimes it's pure serendipity, and for some reason these ideas just pop up. But again, it means, coming back to your point you just made before, you kind of need to free up your mind in order to be able to do that. It doesn't always work, but when it works, it's actually pretty cool, and you get lots of new insights.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm exactly the same. I mean, I can fill a page of notes just when I come back from a run, just because for whatever reason you're not explicitly thinking about things, but it just flows naturally, and it's creative, and it's a key source of insight for me, or inspiration for me anyway.
Exactly. I mean, I give you a specific example. I recently bought a 3D fractal from Swarovski, and it's a fractal consisting of 4,423 little cubes, Swarovski cubes, that are glued together in a fractal structure. And when I saw the lights going through and breaking into various other colors, I just had a couple of really cool ideas for some business ideas. So it has nothing to do with each other, but it's somehow, I don't know how the brain works. There are specialists for that, but it seems to be interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Final question. I mean, to what do you attribute your success in life? I mean, are there any specific skills or habits or mindsets that you've mastered that you think have really made a difference?
Yes. I think there are a few sort of things that you can control, and there are, of course, a few things you cannot control. The ones you can control, for me, are fairly simple. So first, hard work is hard work. I mean, there's nothing, that's it, right? Yeah. I mean, that is required. Second is clearly creativity. Taking the time to be creative and thinking ahead of the game, because that avoids fights later down the road. So I've seen that several times. By being just simply faster and more creative, you've already sort of resolved the issue before it could even arise. So that's the second one. And the third one is a simple saying that I have, which says, ethics will prevail. Mm-hmm. It's not completely used everywhere in the world at all times, but I just stick with it because I feel that ultimately ethics is what is required, and I think in the long term one is better off following ethics. That's because then you have friends. If you always go for the win and you need to deploy ways that are not so nice, at some point it will come back. Come back to you. And then the fourth one, and I think that's very important, is being open to serendipity and options that you create. Had I not gone to India, I would have never founded Evalueserve, for example, right? Yeah. It was risky. It was, everybody said it's end of career, but, so these are the four simple sort of rules that I apply, and maybe it has helped a bit.
Lovely. Excellent. Marc, I mean, it's been a great pleasure having you back on the show. I mean, a lot of really rich content, not just in the conversation, but also in the book. And we'll include the details of the book and where people can get in touch with you in the show notes. But many, many thanks for your time. And, we'll look forward to, keeping in touch and putting up also any reviews of the books on the show notes, as well as they start coming out once it's released on the bookshelves.
Great. Thank you very much, Mark, for having me in your show.
Okay. Have a great day.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Hi, this is Mark again. Welcome back. Thoroughly enjoyed that conversation with Mark. I loved, his rationale for bringing his son to some of his leadership meetings. I think we can all learn from his open approach to exploring and bringing different opinions to his executive team. Secondly, how he sees, the disruption of some of the industries, what's going on, and how he feels those disruptions are being played out. And thirdly, how he brings the Mind+Machine strategy to his clients' problems, and how he enables his clients to free up their time to innovate more, to build new capabilities. So plenty in there. Hopefully you enjoyed it as much as I did. Please feel free to leave comments on the show at the end of the show notes on www.innovationecosystem.com. Highly recommend his book Mind+Machine. It's eminently readable. It's relevant. It's the approach that he uses is powerful and can be applied to many business problems, as well as being highly topical, given a lot of discussion around artificial intelligence and around leveraging technology to create new value in the marketplace. Please leave us some notes. Go on to the site to grab a copy of the transcript, look at the show notes, look at some of the materials we produced, www.innovationecosystem.com. Look forward to your comments. Have a great week.